Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's live stream talking about my visit to Cambodia. I just came back yesterday. I'm here in Singapore visiting my family this summer. And one of the privileges of being in this part of the world is that it's easier to get around to different places. And I have to say, I was not prepared for Cambodia. And when I say that, I've been to almost every country on the peninsula. So there's Malaysia, Vietnam, Laos, Thailand. Burma, I haven't been to yet. My Burmese friends are telling me to wait a little bit longer. It's that classic wait for things to clear up. But I think at some point I will go in the near future. But in any case, the last country I had been to on the peninsula was Laos a couple years ago. And Laos is very laid back. If you haven't been there, a lot of greenery, very relaxed people, not very hectic. Capital is the same way. And so I thought going to Cambodia, I thought, well, maybe it'll be like Laos. And it's wrong to think these countries, despite having similar connections to each other, they're very different. Each of the countries are very different. And so I have to admit, to put my hand up and say I underestimated Cambodia in many ways. It's a beautiful country and there's so much to do and see. And I think that's on my mind for my next visit when I come back. So I've only been to South Vietnam. I've been to Saigon, but I haven't been up to Hanoi. So that's something I want to do in the future as well. And I've heard wonderful things about the north of Vietnam. But in any case, today we're talking about Cambodia. And the other comment I wanted to make is this idea of conflict and visiting places. Now, I didn't plan this, but last summer I was in Lebanon while the South was under attack from the Israelis. And there was a fragile, you could say, ceasefire in place north in the northern border of Cambodia. But it was enough for many people to cancel, which is a huge shame. This happened to Jordan during the Syrian civil war, that people think, okay, there's a conflict nearby, therefore I'm going to avoid this entirely. Same thing happened when I was visiting countries bordering Russia. In 2022, I went to almost every country that bordered Russia in Europe in 2022, and people were afraid. And they're saying, why are you going to Moldova? Why are you going to these places, Georgia, et cetera? And I said, I don't see the connection between a war that's going on in this other country and this borderland area, especially because I had no notion that Russia was going to invade any of these countries, as I don't buy Western propaganda about Russia. That said, I talked to a lady on the plane as we were landing in Phnom Penh, and she was saying that she had to rearrange her whole trip because she had come to Cambodia to go see the temples at Angkor Wat. And she said, well, because of the conflict and everything, I've just canceled my trip and we're going straight to Vietnam. And I said, why? Who told you that? She's like, oh, well, I just think it's not safe. And I thought, well, I think you should just come and just see the capital. You already made your bookings, and talk to the locals and see whether Siem Reap is okay. Siem Reap was not an integral part of my Cambodia trip. I definitely wanted to go up there and see Angkor Wat, but I didn't. I was there for other reasons. So in any case, she canceled. She has to get a visa to enter Cambodia now because she's not transiting anymore. Then she has to get another visa to go to Vietnam because she's coming earlier than her earlier visa. All of this trouble to say, I went to Angkor Wat, no problem. Everything had been fine, but as usual, the news blows everything up and the people suffer because they're counting on that tourist revenue. And many people, like this lady, when I was up in Siem Reap, it was a lot quieter than usual because many Westerners had canceled because they bought the propaganda, unfortunately. And if you don't know what's going on, Brian Berletic will fill you in on what's going on between Thailand and Cambodia. But as usual, it's another US-backed issue. The US cannot allow China to rise. They cannot allow Asia to rise peacefully, economically. So they have to create conflict. And this Cambodia-Thailand conflict, although it's rooted in historic issues, which go back hundreds of years, actually, not just in the colonial era, but before that, they're taking advantage of this to create problems for both Thailand and Cambodia. So let's talk about the difficult things that I saw. And this includes S21, which was the prison run by the Khmer Rouge, and the killing fields, where a large number of people were killed. And it, I would encourage you to look at the history of the Khmer Rouge. One of the things I enjoy one of the things I enjoy about visiting any place I do in the world is going to see different Catholic churches. And one of the things I learned was the Khmer Rouge destroyed 73 churches when it came to power, including this beautiful cathedral that dated from the time of the French colonization of Cambodia. And interestingly, the French colonization of Cambodia is one of these interesting cases in which the colonization protected the country from other people and from the Thais and the Vietnamese. Different discussion for a different time. But I wasn't able to visit. There weren't any churches built prior to Vatican II, which means there weren't any churches worth visiting. And that was one more reflection on the importance of seeing communism. I talk about the difference between studying communism and seeing communism. It's the same difference between studying a language and learning a language. You can study all you want in a classroom, but you'll really learn a language when you're immersed in it. You can read about communism all you want, but when you go to the KGB prison in Latvia that I went to in Riga, and you see the holes in the wall where people were shot, and you see the drain where the blood drained, and you see the back alley where they kept a car engine running so people couldn't hear the gunshots, or you go to the House of Terror in Budapest, and you see where people are tortured, how they were tortured. It's the same thing going to this genocide prison, S21, in Phnom Penh, that when you see communism in action, you see the joke of communism just hasn't ever been tried. It's been tried. What it does is it murders people. That's what communism does. And I think that if more people had a chance to, you could say, see communism rather than only study communism, it wouldn't be so theoretical to them. So the museum, the S21 museum, it's going to take you at least 3 hours to see it. Really just gently see it. The audio guide is exceptional. A lot of times museums don't necessarily put in a lot of work into their audio guide. They just do a series of recordings. This one was immersive. They had music that was composed by some Cambodians to reflect on the murders that had happened. There were temporary exhibitions on top of some of the buildings. This was a former high school that was converted into a torture and murder center. The gallows were preserved outside, and unbelievably, and I would have spent more time talking to them, although I'm not sure what I would ask. There were 2 survivors from this prison camp there with their books. The least I could do, I bought their books. I hope to review them on the channel sometime. But I thought, what would I ask these men? And one of the Dutch girls who was on the tour with us said, I can't believe he's here. Because you think about, and I understood her perspective. This man had gone through so much trouble and difficulty in this place. And now he's here potentially every day selling these books. And I said to her, well, one thing is he can earn some kind of income. It's important. But also he can be a resource. He can be here to answer questions from people. And I said, I don't think he's here necessarily every day. And I don't think he's here for 8 hours potentially. But I'm very grateful that he was there, even though I didn't have a chance to talk to him. As I said, I hope to read both of their books. They're not very long, and I want to share them with you on this channel. But that was the prison. So many people were killed there. But we also went out to what is known as the killing fields, which is about half an hour outside of Phnom Penh. And here, in a sense, it was both more difficult and the same. More difficult in that there were certain monuments to the murders. You see, there were so many mass graves there, and because of the weather patterns in Cambodia, where there's a rainy season and flooding, what happens a lot of times every year after the rainy season is bits of bone and clothing and other elements of humans come up to the top, and they're retrieved and they're put into a glass box so that people can see what is happening every year. There's more and more elements of humanity coming up from underneath all these mass graves. And probably the most difficult part to visit is what is known as the killing tree. So the killing tree is this tree where people have put, you could say, bracelets. I think, just sort of elements of love in tribute to these children. The Khmer Rouge guards would take babies and smash them against this tree. And in fact, smash is the word that the cadres of the Khmer Rouge would use. And there's an organization called Angkar, not to be confused with Angkor, which is referring to the temples. Angkar, which straight out of 1984, communism, has it ever been given a chance to work? Yes, it does, and it kills people all the time. This organization just murdered their own people. And I was thinking about this in relation to, as you know, I have a lot of interest in Palestine. If you don't know about my Palestine bookshelf channel, I just push you over there to take a look at that. But I thought about the fact that in some sense, it's quite easy for IDF soldiers to murder Palestinian children because they consider them garbage. They consider them snakes. They refer to them as cockroaches, etc. So in some sense, you can see, all right, well, they've dehumanized that population. They're otherized, so it's easier to kill them. But the Khmer Rouge were killing their own people. These are Cambodians killing Cambodians. This is the Hutus and the Tutsis in Rwanda. This is your own population killing your own population. And as usual, the lazy atheist argument will be, well, how could a good God allow this to happen, etc. And there is a great mystery when you think about these populations around the world who have paid a great price in their societies. Think about the Aztecs, for example. All the neighboring tribes were enslaved. They had their youngest and most beautiful children sacrificed, usually in a horrific manner. And here, what were the Cambodians doing? And it's very difficult for us, trapped in time and with our limited perception, to understand why things happen. But the first response to atheists should always be, who told you that it was God's job to provide you with happiness nonstop? That's God's job. And that if you look at the times that you've grown in your life, in the times where you've developed in a way, it's always been because of challenges or difficulties. So if God can send you those challenges or difficulties in order for you to develop, could he not send civilizational, national challenges and difficulties in order to improve a situation? I'm not pretending to understand. I just am saying that an atheist argument that how could a good God do this, it's just very lazy, because it ignores the realities in someone's own life, that they will not say, oh, it's only ever when I've been happy that life has been good. That's not God's job. We owe everything to God. He owes us nothing. And it's our job to seek to love him and to serve him, and to help others to know and love him and serve him. So these sorts of opportunities are, I think, when you're challenged the most, especially because you'll be with other people on the tour who are going to push this narrative. How could a God allow this, etc.? And I get that. I get that perspective. If you're not a believer, if you don't have faith, I think it's an easy argument to make, but I think it's also a lazy one. The other thing about the killing tree, so the killing tree was with babies. So babies didn't really, you could say, cry out. They were killed immediately. They don't know what's happening to them. They get picked up, they get swung against this tree, they're murdered, it's over for them. But there were villages surrounding the killing fields. So they needed to make sure that the other villages weren't hearing that there were a bunch of gunshots happening every night. So over by what is known as the magic tree, they had speakers hung up in the tree, and the speakers would play semi-traditional Cambodian music, but these were, you could say, hymns of revolution. And there was a diesel generator that was powering the speakers. And one of the really difficult parts of the tour, when the guide stops you over by what is known as the magic tree, and it plays the sort of music that would have been happening, and then it adds the diesel generator, somewhat of a soundtrack from hell. It says these are the last things these people would have heard before they died. And it was not an easy, painless death. You almost say, wouldn't it be nice to be guillotined? Wouldn't it be nice to be shot in the head? What happened was, because they didn't want to shoot, they didn't want to alarm the other villages, they would bludgeon these people to death with farming implements. So we're talking clubs, hoes, rakes, whatever it might be. This is how these people were murdered. And they were murdered to the sound of a diesel generator and Khmer Rouge propagandistic music. And this again goes back to the question of, how can a good God allow this to happen? When we look at our lives and we look at the privileges we have, and we look at how the Cambodians have had to pay the price, Armenians have had to pay the price, Palestinians have had to pay the price, Rohingya have had to pay the price, Tibetans have had to pay the price, any oppressed population. The question cannot be about that. These are things that we've done to ourselves. When we look at how things have eventuated, part of the reasons we have conflicts is we as humans don't choose to allow Christ to reign over us. And as a result, we have conflict. This isn't to say that when we do have Christ reigning over us, as we did in the Middle Ages in Europe, that there is no conflict. In fact, the rules of war, the conduct of war was formulated during the Middle Ages when Christian princes fought against each other. But my point is that when we're reflecting on these great evils, we would do well, I think, particularly to look to the Palestinians as reference points, because you do not see them complaining about, why did God do this to me? As I've always said, I'm so impressed and so edified and so inspired by the way that Palestinians think about what's happened to them. They'll say, praise God, it's God's will. God allowed me to accept this. God has taken my children. But there's no resentment, there's no anger, there's no bitterness. And if anyone would have reason to quote unquote be angry, bitter, upset at God, if we want to put it in this natural way of thinking, it would be those people. But you can see that their faith in God is so strong that when confronted with the most horrible evils, they simply reference back to him. And this obviously is reminiscent of Job. His wife says, curse God and die. He refuses to. The Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of God. God doesn't owe us anything. He doesn't owe us anything. We owe everything to God. And I suppose that's one of the biggest reminders I take when I visit places like this, and you're depressed and you're sad for the rest of the day on a human level, just from seeing this. But the supernatural has to kick in at some point and say, I don't know why this happened, but one day it will be revealed to me. And for Christians, we know this will be revealed at the general judgment at the end of time. We will understand why everything has happened the way it did in this life. And then we'll move on. We'll turn the page from this life and we'll enter eternity, which is going to be a whole lot more interesting and exciting. As St. Paul said, eye has not seen, ear has not heard what is waiting for us in life to come. Let me stop in the chat briefly. Braden, haven't visited Cambodia. I recommend it. Americans will have to get a visa. You can get a visa on arrival or an e-visa. I had to get an e-visa because I'm running out of room in my passport. It expires next year, and I couldn't risk the free page that I had left getting stamped before I got to Cambodia, so I had to get a visa done. But you can get a visa on arrival for 30 days, single entry. If you're an American, I can't speak for other nationalities, but it's not difficult. And I would recommend going to Phnom Penh first, and then you can get around to different places. I took an overnight bus from Phnom Penh to Siem Reap. Now, when you say overnight bus, I know you're thinking a regular bus with seats. No, the overnight bus, and there are different classes of overnight bus, but I got this one. It has a lay flat bed with curtains, air conditioning vents, lights, USB plug, and pretty much peace and quiet because everyone else on the bus is sleeping as yours. So there's double beds on the other side for maybe married couples. And it was $17 each way, and it was a 6-hour ride from the capital to Siem Reap. I slept like a baby both ways. And part of it was I had been visiting a lot of places, so I'd worn myself out. But the bus ride was fairly peaceful. So if you want to go up to Siem Reap, you can take a flight. It would be something like $200, $250, but the flight times are not convenient. I recommend just taking an overnight bus. I was there for a sunrise tour, so I left at 10:30 the night before, and I got in. Sorry, I left at 8:30, maybe 8:30, 8:45, and then I got in around 2 or 3, and then I started a sunrise tour at 4:30 to be in front of the temple before the sun rose around 5:30. I want to say 5:40. So I recommend it. It's worth visiting, and it's if you're coming from a Western country, the prices will seem like a joke to you, and it'll be a great opportunity for you to be really generous with people. Something I talk about in travel. It's been said by certain people that sometimes traveling can be a political act. And for example, I'll give you an idea of tipping. We went on a food tour, some people and I, the other night. And at the end of the night, we tipped our drivers each $10. So US dollars are still in circulation from when the UN came in to administrate Cambodia after the fall of the Khmer Rouge. And so US dollars is still used a lot, but they have their own currency as well. But in any case, $10 giving to someone, it may not be a big deal to you when you think I'm on a trip, I want to give a gift to somebody. But for them, that could be a week's salary. It could be a week of their rent, whatever it might be. So it may not be a lot to you, but it can mean a lot to them. And it's a chance for you as a political act to show generosity to these people. In fact, they use the term fake money to refer to Western money because they don't mean what we mean when we talk about the fact that these central banks just create the money out of thin air deceitfully. That's a different thing. What they mean is it seems fake to them because of how freely we spend it as Westerners. They can't conceive of how easy we are with that money, but they don't realize for us $10 is not so much, but for them it's huge. So it's a great opportunity to be generous with those people around you, and you feel very conscious of it. I think when you walk around, if you just think I've got AirPods in, AirPods at retail value are almost double what the average salary for a month is in Cambodia. Same thing if I'm carrying an iPhone, that's a year's salary you're carrying around with you. And the reputation was there are street thieves, etc. There are street thieves in America too. So this notion that Southeast Asia is plagued by these in a way that the United States or Europe is not, let me disabuse you of that notion, having lived in America and Europe. There's plenty of street thievery going on there too. Guitar tunings, convert to Orthodoxy. Why would I do that when Matthew 16:18 talks about Peter being established as the head of the church and enter an illogical ethno religion in which each whatever region of the Orthodox Church has its own authority given to them by nobody. So the authority to rule the church was given to St. Peter, the first pope, in Matthew 16:18 in scripture. It was carried out by tradition, confirmed by the Council of Florence Ferrara, in which the representative of the Greek Orthodox signed. The monarch, the emperor of the Byzantines, he signed it as well, and he died a Catholic as well. So that's something to keep in mind. He did not revert. He went back. The people of Constantinople, better the turban than the tiara, and they got their wishes. Very famously, too, there was a famous icon that was being carried around Constantinople at that time, and it fell to the ground, and it could not be picked up. So Our Lady had given up on Constantinople as well. If you want to read a bit more about this, a good starter history would be 1453 by, I think, Roger Crowley is his name. But no, man, Orthodoxy is not the way, unfortunately. I prefer the traditions of the church. The Irish people should see how the Pope has laughed as Ireland is being flooded by fire. Well, Guitar, you don't know that, well, this is maybe not the place to get into this discussion, but I do not consider the post-Vatican II claimants to be valid popes. It doesn't mean I don't believe in the papacy. Michael, this reminds me of Psalm 137. I'm not sure when you said this, Michael, in the stream, but if you want to revisit that, I would love to hear more about what you were saying. Atheists are lazy. Guitar, if you're interested in this, I'm starting a space in a few minutes, just right when I end the stream. I'm over on X. If you go, I'm starting a stream talking about the Jordan B. Peterson debate with 20 atheists. And I have to say, the clips made it look very bad, but it ended up being a pretty good exchange. There's some pretty thoughtful atheists out there who I think are on the right path. I think our Lord will guide them because I feel they're open. So that was a really, so check out that Jordan B. Peterson Jubilee interview if you haven't. And then if you're interested in hearing me talk about it, I'll be on X in just a couple of minutes talking about it. Guitar, my interpretation is wrong. Well, today we're talking about Cambodia, not about the governance of the church. Remember that the idea that there could not be unity in the church, which is what goes on among the Orthodox. The Russian Orthodox do not agree with the Bulgarian Orthodox, don't agree with the Serbian Orthodox. It's just fancy Protestantism with valid sacraments in some cases. But I'm talking about Cambodia today. So if you want to have an exchange with me, feel free to contact me by email or on social media. I'm happy to talk about it. But I don't want to hijack a stream talking about Cambodia and the genocide in Cambodia to talk about Orthodoxy, Catholicism. Yeah, guitar. If you're unfamiliar, there are Greek Catholics, there are Armenian Catholics, and some of them have their own rites. The Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, the Liturgy of St. Mark. I was in Egypt about a month ago now, and they use the Liturgy of St. Mark, the Coptics. So we have many, many rites in the Catholic Church, respecting their traditions, respecting their ethnicities. But what's different in Orthodoxy is the ethnicity is exclusive, whereas in Roman Catholicism, universal, it's something that embraces everybody. As I said, I don't want this to be hijacked. Catholics and Orthodox will talk until the cows come home, and I don't want to bore the rest of you with that. But thank you all for stopping by the stream. As I said, if you want to hear my talk about Jordan B. Peterson, as I said, surprised. I saw the clips. I thought it was going to be terrible, but it ends up being really good. Thank you for stopping by. And if you have questions, comments, feel free to keep the discussion going. If you're watching this later, I'd love to hear from you and hear if any of you have had a chance to go to Cambodia and reflect on what you saw. Thanks so much for stopping by.